immense pleasure to be here. My name is Oscar Vilhena Vieira. I'm the Dean of the FGV Law School, and I will be moderating this fantastic panel. I will not go to the usual protocol because we are very short on time, so I just will mention who are in this panel. Ana Valéria Araújo, who is the Executive Coordinator of the Brazilian Fund for Human Rights. Fábio Barbosa, who's a former CEO of Abril Group and Banco Santander Brazil, and a member of the United Nations Foundation Board. We also have Jorge Shediak, who is the UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative in Brazil. We have also my friend Marcos Lisboa, who's the Director and Vice President at INSPE and former Secretary of Finance of Brazil, and Mr. Narayana Murthy, who's a co-founder of Infosys and UN Foundation board member. Unfortunately, Emma Rothschild was unable to come to Brazil, and Denise Dora had a last-minute incident in Porto Alegre. We miss her, but we will start and try to, with all the knowledge in the room, to put the questions that were to her to other members of this panel. So the panel will be about the rule of law. As you all know, the rule of law became a major political principle all over the world. You have people on the streets of Buenos Aires in the end of the 80s claiming for the rule of law to overcome torture. But we also have economists in the World Bank talking about the rule of law to get to a better economic position. So how we deal with this principle that is appropriate for such different people. This is one of the points that this plastic principle must be seen. As we know, we are in a continent, and probably our colleague from the UN will talk about this, where the rule of law is breaking systematically on a major issue, which is respect for the right of life. Latin America is responsible today for 31% of the homicides of the globe, although only 8% of the people live here. So this is the major violation of the rule of law, consists in violating the right to life. So this is just an introduction. I would like to start by Jorge Shediak, if I may, and if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, please do correct me. As we know, after 15 years of the Millennium Development Goals, there is enormous energy being invested in introducing a rule of law goal. Could you tell a little bit about this goal? Could you tell about the role of countries like Brazil, India, or China in dealing with the introduction of this goal on the revision of the Millennium Goals?
Well, the Millennium Goals, as most of you know, were basically centered around improving the quality of lives of people, but improving it from the perspective of their individual situation, giving them access to more social goods. And in that, they were extremely successful in mobilizing the world in really building a more dignified humanity. We are much better off than we were 15 years ago, and much of that improvement was a result of the mobilization that was triggered by this global agenda. On the other hand, we need to complement that agenda and go beyond it. That's why we have this new agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. It maintains the need to ensure absolute progress in all the social dimensions, but it includes an environmental dimension, because our current patterns of production and consumption are totally unsustainable. And also, it includes a dimension of rule of law. Why? Because the improvement of human dignity is not just the material conditions. People have many dimensions. They are citizens. They are not just consumers of goods and services. And in that context, we need to build nations and a global community where the essential equality of men and women from all over the world can be represented. And that's why this particular goal of the goal 16 of this Sustainable Development Goals agenda was included. It's a great challenge, but this is the real formula that we can build a real humanity based on the principles of the UN Human Rights Declaration of 1948 that starts saying that we're all equal regardless of our race, the color of our skin, or the way we believe in God.
I just didn't mention the rules of the debate. We have around 3 minutes for each of you to answer these questions that are not my questions, are questions organized by some of the students and practitioners that were here. I'm just trying to put them together. Okay,
No,
so you have...
No, did I overshoot?
You went very well, 1.5 minutes, so I will keep track of it, all right? Well, perhaps we could then move to Marcos, since the inclusion of the rule of law as a commitment of the international community also has immense impact in the model that the economies are run. Could you comment on the, sometimes people say tensions, sometimes people say they have a great affinity.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, economics actually was born as a science to understand growth, to understand how do economies get richer, right? What should one do for that? That was the original theme of Adam Smith. And actually, for close to 200 years, it was a sort of failure, right? The profession tried to understand what are the causes of growth, and we couldn't go much beyond human capital and capital accumulation as an explanation why some economies are successful, some are not. Up to the early 90s. And in the early 90s, economists start to look at the economic history literature, started by Douglas North almost 40 years ago, and to look at the whole of institutions. And we start trying to understand and to test empirically if institutions do matter for growth. And actually, the answer was an impressive yes. So since the early 90s, we have this huge literature on how institutions and the rule of law, essentially, matters for growth. So strong institutions, good institutions, constitutional systems, all these matters to explain why some countries got richer in the last 200 years and some failed, right? And nowadays you have this, I mean, actually you have this recent book by Darrell Stemoglu and Jim Robinson about it, why nations fail, right? We deal with some, it's a divulgation book of some of these topics. So what we learn is the importance of rule of law, and security and rules that provide security for investment, long-term investment, provide human rights. So all that matters for growth. And that's surprising you from the economic side in the last couple of decades.
If I may stay with you for 1 second. There are several papers making regressions and saying that if you acquire a certain level of inequality in a society, the rule of law has a difficulty to run because people access rights in a different way. Some people tend to benefit more than others from their rights. Would you like to comment on?
This has been an old topic in the political economy literature since the early 70s. You know? How to deal with inequality and political institutions and growth, right? And certainly create tension. I mean, inequality is a source of tension. There is no consensus on the academic literature, and you have evidence that inequality may hurt growth. You have some controversy on that subject. But certainly we see that in Brazil, right? I think this is a major discussion in Brazil. Brazil managed in the last 15 years to reduce inequality in an impressive way, right? So we, at the peak of the hyperinflation in Brazil, the Gini index was close to 0.6, which is an incredibly high number, and now it's coming down to close to 0.5, which is still very high, but much better. And what we learned in Brazil, I guess, since the end of Cardoso's administration and during Lula's administration, was first of all, inequality dropped in Brazil not because of social policy. That's the misconception that you have in the debate. Some people say, oh, inequality in Brazil dropped because of social policy. No, actually no. Social policy in Brazil was very relevant to reduce the extreme poverty, right? It did not affect in a relevant way inequality, right? So what has caused inequality in Brazil to drop? First of all, labor market. It's amazing. Now, what happened in Brazil was good economic growth, formalization of the labor market, and a new generation that had more education than the previous one. So since the early 80s, Brazil finally started to have mass education, which we didn't up to then.
Which is a right in the Constitution.
There
is some budget allocation for that.
This generation that was born in the late 80s got to the labor market in the 2000s. They had more education than their parents. They had higher wage. We had, together with that, you had this period of faster growth, and you have the minimum wage policy. The combination of that was explained why inequality dropped in the last decade.
Okay, thank you, Marcos. If I may, Fabio, I just will tell something. I met Fabio Barbosa when he was president of a bank, and he invited some people, I was among them, to talk about human rights and business. So obviously my first provocation will be about this. As we know today, several of the human rights violations that we see around the globe are provoked by business, mostly in the field of mining and in other areas also. How the business community is seeing its responsibility regarding human rights?
So I'm very optimistic actually on this field, because I think the consciousness of the companies are getting stronger and better in any sense. Sometimes when you talk about business, people associate that business shouldn't care about anything. Go to Milton Friedman here says the business of business is business, and that's it. And I think over time what we saw, and actually, I mean, here besides an economist which probably studies it thoroughly, but I read a little bit about this concept. And actually what Milton Friedman at the end was saying is that business of business is sustainable business, in the sense that the business has to be done today and tomorrow, and the value of the company is nothing more than a future stream of results discounted at present value. So the company has to be able to replicate things one day after the other. Milton Friedman was against people granting money, executives granting money and so on, but not against the strategy, which has to be sustainable. Now, society is demanding more and more. The new consumers, they are more conscious about the impact that company causes on environment, on the social, on ethical aspects, and therefore they are putting pressure on the companies to streamline. And I believe that with transparency, free media, and with more conscious consumers, the companies are moving in the right direction, slowly, but they are. And yesterday I was talking about that there are 3 reasons why companies become more conscious and less on this model that you refer to. Sometimes for conviction, sometimes for convenience, and sometimes out of embarrassment, because they have to do something because everybody's pressuring them to do. So I think that is a false dilemma to say that companies should not look after the impact they cause on labor or on environmental just because they are there to make money. They have to make money within the rules of the game, and these rules of the game are becoming more transparent.
Okay, if I may pass the floor to Mrs. Narayama, and from what I know, you could help enlighten us about the role of new technology, about the role of the new media in improving rule of law in many circumstances. Could you please comment on this relation and the role of the new media and the new technology regarding human rights and rule of law?
Sure. You know, President Roosevelt defined a democracy as having 4 attributes: freedom of expression, freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom of faith. Any society that wants to have peace and harmony has to ensure that every citizen has access to these 4. every system of law has to ensure that every citizen has access to these four. In order to make sure that every citizen receives justice and fairness, first of all, they have to be aware of their rights. They have to be aware of the law. And that's where I believe that social media, internet, print media, television media, all of these, buttressed by the platform technology, become extremely important. That's how you can connect the remotest village in Brazil with Brasilia. That's how you bring a sense of leveling between the richest person and the poorest person, because both have to be equal before law. So therefore, the ability of social media to form fora, to form groups, to have discussions, to learn from each other, to express their opinion, correct their opinion, and as a group put forward their opinion is extremely important. I mean, you know better than I do what happened in Egypt. Most of what happened in the Arab Spring happened thanks to social media. So therefore, I believe that social media, new technology, they have a very, very important role in ensuring that every citizen is fully empowered to understand, to know what his or her rights are, at the same time to know what his or her responsibilities are, because no society can make progress only by people knowing their rights. They have to concurrently know what their responsibilities are.
Okay, so taking his last phrase about the relationship between progress and rights, and Valeria, you as one of the most important indigenous lawyer in the country, and we see that there are many issues. There's an amendment under consideration regarding reviewing the process of demarcation of indigenous land in Brazil. But I would like to understand your perspective on the relationship of progress, of developmentism, and the rights of groups, traditional groups that live mainly in the forest, and indigenous people.
Okay. That's also a very interesting question. And I would start by saying that I think that development, as we conceive right now, as we see right now, or as I would say, the ideology of developmentalism, as I call them, does not embrace and actually violates the rule of law. And when I'm talking about the rule of law, I'm actually referring to the group of rights of those different segments of our societies. There are invisible sometimes, but there have been had their rights recognized for the past years in our constitutions, and I mean in a number of different pieces of legislations in Brazil. Why do I say that? I think the model of the development that we conceive implies the idea that the country, our country, needs to overcome the gaps that separate us from the richest countries in the world. Well, if the baseline for the development model is the existing gap, we are in a hurry. We are always in a hurry to overcome such gap. It's sort of a race against time. So if that is so, I cannot conceive an idea that the plans and projects to develop to fulfill that gap may be blocked, modified, altered by the need to respect the laws or the rights of indigenous peoples, or Quilombo communities that are in the middle of the plains. So to solve the equation is with regard to how to conciliate the need to move forward with development plans and the need to protect indigenous people's rights, Quilombola rights, and all those people's rights that are going to be affected by major infrastructure plans and constructions is, I think, one of the largest, or maybe the main challenge that we have right now.
Okay, thank you. All of you were under 3 minutes, even you that asked 2 questions. So congratulations for that, and thank you. Makes my life easier. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we are in a peculiar continent regarding the rule of law, not just tradition of violations by the state, but also this paradox of living in a continent that is very democratic, but even though very violator in many sense. And UN, by its many agencies, is dealing with the disproportional impact of violence over the youth. And at this moment in Brazil, there is a proposal pending in Congress to reform the Constitution and decrease the criminal age for the youth from 18 to 16, the criminalization age. How do you analyze this possibility? This is for George Shediak.
First, there is a tendency when a society feels threatened by violent crime to call for people, for criminals to be put in jail and throw away the key. And that's why our region has been doing. In addition to being the most, the region with the highest homicide rate, we are the region with the highest and growing incarceration rate. Brazil has grown exponentially in the last few years, the number of people who are in jail. If you include the people under house arrest, it's the third largest prison population in the world after the United States and China. And that has not resulted in a significant improvement in the crime rate. As a matter of fact, the homicide rate has not budged over the last few years. So what's the position of the UN institutionally on the reduction of the the age of penal responsibility? One, there are international treaties that call against that. Also studies from developmental psychology that show that somebody under 18 is not totally formed. So we have legislation and we have science on the side of not doing that. But in addition, we feel that the proposed solution will create an extra problem because the current prison system in most of the region, the one you mentioned, and particularly in Brazil, is not a place that is conducive to the rehabilitation of people. The Minister of Justice, the current Minister of Justice, said that he preferred to die rather than to go to a Brazilian jail. That's the Minister of Justice of Brazil. So the implicit solution of reducing the age is putting those young people in jail. And after some years in a prison, they will become PhD in criminality. So not only we question it from the legal, moral, and psychological perspective, but also from a practical perspective. It will not work. It will not result in the reduction of crimes. A public security policy is a comprehensive approach. It includes social dimensions. It includes also better policing. It includes a state more engaged. It includes the participation of the private sector as employer. I doubt very much that somebody with a penal record will be hired by a bank. So then where is the opportunity of that person to rejoin the market? So in sum, we feel that we need in our region and in Brazil in particular, a global and smart strategy for public safety. Finally, I want to make a note. 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting in our office about the fact that tens of thousands of those Brazilians who are in jail, again, becoming hardened criminals in the process, are in jail because they were caught with minute amounts of drugs. Is that the people we want to have in jail excluded from society and joining more advanced stages of criminality? I don't think so. So we are proposing a debate, and it is being launched as we speak at the technical level, and eventually will reach a political level to see who should be in jail and who should not be. But from our perspective, children under 18 should not be.
Okay, thank you. There is an interesting report that came about today from IPEA showing that from 2002 to 2012, 350,000 youth were killed in homicides in Brazil. That is almost 50 or a little bit over 50% of the total homicides in Brazil. Just for the people to have an idea, at the Vietnam War, 58 US troops were killed. So in 10 years, we have 6 times what US troops were killed in Vietnam. That's just to have, you know, it is a little over caricatural, but I think it gives the sense of what we are facing.
More people have died in Brazil in the last 3 years than in Syria.
Yes, yes. And if you take the homicides committed by the youth, it's below 1%. So just to understand, if the criminal code doesn't hold criminality for the adults, now we are trying to apply to the adolescents. Just, I think, perhaps a last question regarding this immense problem in Latin America. From my recollection, one of the first donations of UNF in Brazil was to move the campaign on gun control. It was a very successful campaign. Brazil adopted a new legislation. It was implemented in several states, in other states not so much. And in São Paulo and Rio, where it was more effective, the implementation of the law, São Paulo had a drop of 70% of the homicide rate. Rio has a slightly smaller, but also a very substantive decrease. And now we are also moving to the re-debate the legislation on gun control. So this could go to one of the other members of the UNF board. How UNF is approaching the question of gun control? How important is this in the agenda? Or if you want to talk about this without UNF hat.
Okay, actually, I don't think it's on the agenda. That's not something which is discussed. But I will comment a little bit, if you allow me, just because I understand there are to be controls, and sometimes I have the impression that we are taking the guns from people which are not the ones we should be taking guns from. I'll give you an example, concrete example. My grandfather, just a short story, my grandfather somehow had a rifle. A rifle from the revolution in 1932. Now he passed.
Which side of the revolution he was? This is
well, he was Paulista, so
okay,
he was
so
fighting.
He could have the rifle.
But look at that. This is it's a Mauser produced in Germany in 1917. Now I have this rifle with me. I want to register it. Now I had to go to the police. I had a test for 1 hour with one psychologist to find out whether I was or I was not a capable person to have a rifle at home. They went to my house to take picture to see where the rifle is kept and whether it has a lock and if nobody has access to it, which I don't even know whether it works. I don't have any bullets. Now, I say, something is wrong. I said to the guy, I'm glad you're doing that to me because I imagine that everybody else which represented riskier groups have already been taken care of, and now you're spending time with me, which is fair. I will do because I want to do things properly. But sometimes I think that we're getting the wrong message. We are going after the people which register arms, which goes like that. It's incredible. I'm not kidding. 1 hour with a psychologist. I was making those things, fill in the blanks, and put dots one after the other to see if I was a normal citizen. That something is wrong. Yes, having some control is good, but no, I don't think we have it properly. We ended up doing for the citizens which do not represent a risk because they do things legally.
Would you like to comment on UNF and gun control? Or?
No, not really. I'm not aware of gun control issue at all because I don't live in the U.S. I live outside, so I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
In my country, you can't possess guns unless you get permission from the government.
Okay, so let's move back to Marcos, perhaps, on one discussion that we were having outside, which is this tension that we are living, not just in Brazil, but if we move to other countries. You mentioned Egypt, we can mention Spain, we can mention Mexico, we can mention Chile and now, where we are seeing the new generations on the streets. And one of the interesting things regarding, I'm excluding Egypt now, but if you take if you take Spain or Chile or Brazil, please don't kill me, the youth here on the room. It's a very conservative agenda because it's not a revolutionary agenda. Nobody's willing to remove democracy or changing. They are claiming for the rights that normally were promised on the constitutions. It's a very standardized agenda. Oh, you promise health. The health is not very good. You promise education. Education is not very proper. So how we deal with this agenda, which increase costs over governments, and an economic situation of scarcity, a fiscal crisis, as you normally call it.
So maybe I'm going to suffer more than you from the youth here. I think there is a misconception there. I think first you are right. I see these movements as a very conservative one. To some extent, they demand more quality public services, and that's fine and that's fair, right? It's not a question of scarcity, right? Brazil actually spend a lot of money on public services. Unfortunately, we are very ineffective, right? So, and actually, you don't see any correlation. You get, for example, the data from the state of São Paulo, how much each county spends on education and the quality of education. There is no relationship. It's not a question, and actually we had increased the amount of money for education in the past 2 decades, and the results have been very frustrating. It's not a question of we are very ineffective. We get very little from the money we spend. And there is an agenda in Brazil which is how to make the state more efficient. You know? It's not a question of throwing money there. There is a much more severe debate why public services in Brazil are so ineffective. Step one. Just another minute. There is another aspect of the manifestation that worries me, is we had in Brazil this myth that the state is able to provide goods, services, without limit. So we don't want to pay for public transportation, we don't want to pay for health, we don't want to pay for going to the universities, you know. And we like to be able to retire at 50 years of age, you know. And that's true in Brazil, right? People do retire at 55 years of age, you know. And we think that's normal. And unfortunately, and that's, I'm going to disagree a bit here, there is a question of time, because Brazil, unfortunately, got old before it got rich. So usually, developed countries, they got richer during the 50s and 60s, and then they provide the welfare state, a very generous one, in several cases. We decide to do that before having the money for it. And we have a demographic problem coming for the next years. We are getting older, like developed countries. We do not have money to provide everything we promised to. And if the fiscal crisis is now worrying people, wait, it's going to get worse.
Okay. If I may return a little bit, and perhaps you could help us here on the discussion of the business community and the Millennium Development Goals, and specifically of this new generation, and since this is a rule of law panel, how you are seeing the business community helping to implement this goal, or to, first of all, accept this as a goal, and then what are the strategies of the business community regarding rule of law as a new goal for the millennium?
Well, let me answer the second one first. Every business plays a very competitive game. As somebody said, while in public, every CEO extols the virtue of competition, in private, he or she will do everything to ensure that there is a monopoly for him or her. Having said that, when you play in a competitive game, you have to accept a set of rules, exactly like you play soccer or you play tennis or cricket, it doesn't matter. And that's where regulations become very important. That's where government has to put in place a rule of law so that these companies compete according to those rules, so that there is harmony, there is benefit for the consumer, and there is economic growth, and there are no monopolies, etc. So therefore, I think every company has to follow rule of law, and there are serious punishment if they did. On the first question that you asked, there are several aspects of MDG and SDG that are very important for companies. For example, one of those goals is diversity. For example, last year in my company, we hired 25,000 engineers, 25,000. Of them, 49% were women. That's something of a record. I mean, our objective is to go to 50%, and we believe that this year, that next year, we should be able to reach 50%. Second, we have created an environment where women can do telecommuting when there is need for that. Third, we have created offices in different parts of the city where it is easy for women to commute very little and add value. I think we have an initiative called IWIN, Emphasis Women's Inclusivity Network. So I think this is one aspect. The second is in sustainability. For example, we have reduced the use of water by 50%. We have reduced use of electricity by about 50%. We have designed our buildings in such a way that the air conditioning load has gone down very, very heavily. I think third, we have to live in harmony with the society and the various initiatives that we have taken up. So I think in our own way, I think we are fulfilling various aspects of MDGs. I just took two major examples.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps we have a last question to the panel. Then we have a question coming from outside, and then we have a question from here, the audience. So, Anna, I think I interrupt you when you were talking about the relationship of environment, development, and the developmentist policies. Brazil is facing several lawsuits on the inter-American system, the inter-American human rights system, OAS, and including there was this tension between a decision of the court and the Brazilian government. Could you talk a little bit about the cases, or any of them, where you have this conflict exposed and how you see this will be solved? In 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Not fair.
So, so let's focus in one thing. But first, the timing issue, Marcus. I think it is real, but it is a problem, and I'll tell you why. Well, let's deal with the legislation that deals with constructions of dams and hydroelectric power plants in Brazil. And let's talk about the case of Belo Monte, for instance, just to discuss what Oscar was asking me. We have a legislation approved in Brazil that requests that indigenous peoples be heard when they are going to be impacted by the construction of a dam or any other piece of construction such as those. What is the objective of that piece of law? What's behind it? Of course it is to, why do you hear someone? It's to take into consideration the opinion of indigenous peoples in the decision-making process. If it's not for that, you don't need to hear indigenous peoples. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and money from the people and the government. Well, this legislation also requests that alternatives studies be made for the case where the project is considered to cause too much damage. So we have to present different alternatives for the population to discuss the alternatives. Well, what happened in the case of Belo Monte, and why is this such a problem, and we're being sued, and there are never-ending conflicts? When the Brazilian government decided to hear the opinion of local population, including indigenous peoples who are going to be impacted by Belo Monte. And I'm only giving the example of Belo Monte, but it happened the same thing in the Giral and Santo Antonio project, and it's going to happen the same thing with the Tapajós project coming now, because it's the same model. What happens is the political decision was taken. It had been decided that we were going to build Belo Monte. So there was never the smallest intention to change that decision. So you hear the local population only to discuss maybe mitigation of damage, but never to change it. And that's why we are only building conflict. Sorry for the time.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So I think, are you prepared to bring the question from the cyber audience? Okay.
I'm Carolina from SocialGood Brazil, and we are having many questions from people outside this room and inside this room. So if we have only one question, right? Okay. So the question is for Marcos Lisboa. What do you think it's necessary to break the myth of the government provide services without limits?
Well, that's a difficult question. Brazil has an impressive number of obscure mechanisms of taxation and transference to special interests. Right? That's a peculiarity of our country. It's not by chance that you have this large government. I mean, you have a government like rich countries, unfortunately, without their quality services, right? And there are many ones. I mean, you have in Brazil is probably one of the few countries in the world that you have taxes that not go to the government but go directly to private interests directly. They don't even go through the government, right? I have for quite a long time already defending Brazil a transparency agenda. Right? So every transfer to special interests should go through government budget, should be approved by Congress, which is not the case right now. and the data should be available for evaluation by researchers. Right? People have no idea. I mean, if you ask how much money unions, from labor syndicates to companies want, how much money do they receive, which is a sort of taxes, right? Because compulsory. We don't know. I mean, how much money do go there? We don't know. How much? So you have this. We are talking about 10 percentage points of GDP in Brazil that goes through private industries that have no evaluation. So I think that's the way to bring democracy to the discussion and to help the population to decide, well, this is a rightful program, should be enforced. This is a problematic one, should be reduced. One comment here, just to end. I think in Brazil, we have a lack of good institutions to deal with conflicts. That's the major problem. We do not deal effectively with conflicts, and that leads to this situation that everybody is see the outcome as a failure. If you talk to the companies, they see it's a failure. If you talk to the Indian groups, they see it's a failure. So we lack good institutional mechanism to deal with conflicts, and that's, I think, is a very important agenda in Brazil that has to prosperate.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. I just ask that they should be made in English. Claudia.
A question concerning crime and minimum wage. You mentioned that one of the objectives, the main objective, is rehabilitation of the criminal. But I put that as one of the four objectives in putting people in jail. You have punishment, you have incapacitation, and you also have a deterrent. And you mentioned that there is more crime and there is more people in jail, but there is a case of a perverse correlation. There is more time. Obviously, you also put more people in jail. And all the studies that I have seen point out to incarcerating people and punishing for crimes is a real deterrent, for crime commitment. The fact that, population incarceration in jail is high in Brazil. In the state of São Paulo, 70,000 people are arrested per annum, but the jail population remains constant at about 130,000. So that means that the turnover is really very high. Police arrests the same criminal 4 or 5 times. So it's not a problem of okay, have to protect the rights of the criminal, but have also protect the rights of the average population. And putting people in jail more time may be a step in the right direction. And the fact that the minimum wage, if somebody can vote for president with 16 years old, why that person shouldn't be responsible for his acts? If voting for president, also, it's very important, right?
On the issue of incarceration, this has been a policy tried. The model case is the United States. The U.S. is the first country in the world in terms of number of people in jail. Jail in the U.S. is falling, as in Brazil, disproportionately on the poor and the people who cannot afford to utilize all the advantages of the legal system. There are more black youth in the U.S. in jail than there are in the university. So I think that gives you an idea of how you can take mass incarceration to the limit. Of course, crime rates went down, but now you have an strange political bedfellows. On the Democratic frontrunner, her first policy speech was how to reduce and eliminate mass incarceration. And 3 of her Republican counterparts on the extreme right have the same platform. It has worked in the sense that it has reduced the crime rate, but at an enormous cost, not just for the 1.6 million people that are in jail in the US, or the 580,000 that are in jail in Brazil, but their families, their communities. And it has reached a point that the cost and the benefits don't seem to match. in the sense of the increase of incarceration and reduction in the crime rate. So we can continue building jails. That's a solution that is valuable. I mean, it is possible. It's a societal choice. But the experience is not that positive. Nobody's advocating letting people who have to be in jail. But you cannot give the same punishment as it was the case in Brazil to somebody who was caught with 3 grams of marijuana and somebody who was detained with 1 ton of marijuana. And where I'm not talking a theoretical case, I'm talking a case mentioned by a minister of the Brazilian Supreme Court. On the age of the penal responsibility, I stand by what we said. We have just posted a communique in the web page of the United Nations system. There we made the technical and the legal arguments, and we don't make the moral arguments, but they are implicit in the points we make there. So I would invite you to access that page and read why we say what we say.
I think we have a moment for a last, if it's not for the same person, so we could speak. I don't know. Go ahead. So last question.
So my name is Felipe. I am a business and law student. I believe when we are talking about rule of law and access to justice in Brazil, we are dealing with 3 big challenges. First one is the social contrast and the problem that people here are not educated for what are the legal rights. Second is even if the laws are in the legal books, sometimes they're not respected. A lot of times they're not respected. And the third problem is even if we have good laws on the legal books, we have so few lawyers and people that gonna fight for those. So my question is, how can we solve these kinds of problems with economic growth and growth?
We have 2 minutes. I asked first the 3 of you that didn't have a second round, make your final comments.
Now, since this is in Brazil, I'll just go quickly. Of course, it's an impossible answer here, but I'll go in one point. And I'll be very superficial here, but the role of state, what's the role of state? It's to assure that every citizen has the right to fight for a life with dignity. Now, we fail as a state because we do not give everyone this right. So I make a provocation saying that, by the way, that Eduardo Janetti da Fonseca came with that, and I just rounded up saying I have no problem with the inequality of income in Brazil. I have a problem with the reason why we have inequality of income in Brazil, which is unequal access to education. So unless we address this point, many of the things you're talking here will never be solved. So on a simple answer, which is complex, education, that's the only way for us to go through this, so people understand their rights, there'll be more lawyers, there'll be more respect, so on. So I believe that's where we are failing as a society.
You want to make your final comments?
Well, you know, whatever I have seen and read and discussed tells me that nobody wants to be a criminal. No parent wants their children to become criminals. When a society does not create enough incentives for people to be good citizens through hope, through opportunity, through high aspirations, through role models, then that section of the society inevitably turns to activities that you and I will shun. Why we shun? Because I have hope. I have opportunity. I know that I can become better and better and better because the society allows me to do that. I think that is, instead of saying, why can't we put people at 16 behind bars, I think we all should be thinking about how can we create opportunities, create better hope for every citizen, as Fabio said, through education. I think that is the reality. That is the only solution that we have to create a society where there is harmony, where inequality is not stark, where you create hope for everybody.
Yeah, final words. Not only some people don't know the rights, but I think most of us in Brazil don't understand that respect for everybody's rights, including minority rights, is the only way to achieve a democracy, a real democracy. So if we are not able to actually harmonize development with rule of law, we're not going anywhere. And for that, we need to find a different model. I think, unfortunately, my generation is kind of addicted to the model in which the only way is to rush. That's my opinion. I actually trust you guys. Please find a different way, because you're not addicted to that model.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists. Round of applause. I'd like to thank INSPA for hosting this meeting, the United Nations to put it together, and the São Paulo plus Social Good, a dialogue for the good. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. First, I think the panel should leave and goes downstairs, and there is a cocktail downstairs. Is that right? Okay, all of you are invited.
Obrigado, professor. Vocês não conseguem entender aqui. Obrigado.